What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
So as you guys know, Mondays are our time to focus on what-if stories, like stories that take place in the Marvel Universe that, well, not really in the Marvel Universe, but take place in the Marvel Multiverse that are part of alternate realities. Now this story, well, there's no other way to put it, guys. This story is just crazy as hell. I mean, it's this is the story about Aunt May becoming a Herald of Galactus. Now, I didn't know this was the case. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'll do searches for like the most ridiculous thing I can find. Like, I was looking up like all the Heralds of Galactus because I was like, what people have been Heralds of Galactus, and what's the most ridiculous thing I can find? I found Thor being a Herald of Galactus. I found a story where Deadpool was a Herald of Galactus, and then I found a story where Aunt May became a Herald of Galactus, and I was like, well, I gotta read this comic. I mean, this is gonna be one of the craziest damn things I've ever seen, and it is absolutely it's absolutely nuts. So here was the deal. In 1984, Marvel did this thing where it was like assistant editors that were the ones taking over. Maybe it was in April, maybe it was part of an April Fool's joke, but it was the idea that they were handing over the reins of all their publications to the assistant editors, and they were going to be the ones that decided what stories were going to go out and what stories weren't. Now, of course, again, it was just kind of a practical joke, but it was really just this idea of putting out just ridiculous stuff. And one of the guys, I think a guy by the name of Mike Carlin, ended up writing this story about Aunt May being a Herald of Galactus. Now, the way this opens up, we essentially have Galactus dealing with Frankie Ray. Now, at the time, Frankie Ray was a legitimate Herald of Galactus. She was really like, I think the one that took over after the Silver Surfer defected, and she was kind of like the Human Torch. I mean, she had cosmic powers, but she flew around with her hair on fire, and it was like a reflection of 1980s big hair, you know, hairstyle, so on and so forth. But in this particular story, Frankie Ray had been killed, and the reason why is because Galactus was going to consume a planet, and the people who were on that planet were like, well, maybe if we destroy our world, it'll basically postpone Galactus's hunger to the point that he'll literally starve to death. It kind of happened, it almost happened, you know, he was starving up until he wasn't, but Frankie Ray actually ended up dying here. So the result was that Galactus was like, well, we gotta go find a new Herald. Like, we gotta find somebody to take over the duties of Frankie Ray. Transition to the circus, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey circus. This is back in the day when Marvel would use like pop culture references, and they would use real world things, just because of the fact that I'm pretty sure at the time it was just good advertisement. But the basis here is that we have Peter Parker and we have Aunt May along with Mary Jane Watson showing up to the circus. Now, the funny thing about this, and something to keep in mind, is that no one knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Again, this, you know, Mary Jane Watson doesn't know, Aunt May doesn't know. It's still a very intrinsic part of his character that his identity is hidden away from the rest of the world. But the other half of this is that Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, this is when they were going through their spurt of being broken up. And so the result was that he gave, you know, 2 extra tickets to Aunt May under the expectation that she was going to end up bringing one of her friends, but instead she brought Mary Jane because the idea was to get Peter Parker and Mary Jane back together again. Now from here, we're also joined by Franklin Richards and the Fantastic Four. And so it's kind of a funny situation here because this isn't actually unreasonable. This is not outside of the realm of expectation because all these heroes are operating out of New York City. And so when Ringling Brothers comes to town, everybody goes. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Ringling Brothers, but everybody goes to the Ringling Brothers circus. And I haven't been to that thing in years. I don't even know if it's still around. But, you know, when it comes to New York, everybody goes. And so it's realistic to believe that the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man would be there. It's insanely unrealistic to believe they'd be sitting right next to each other, but this is the realm of comic books, and we are dealing with a giant purple man that surfs the spaceways and absorbs the energy of planets. So we really kind of have to walk away from actuality and facts and just kind of go with the suspension of disbelief here. But the idea is that Reed Richards, you know, as he's trying to crane around and see what's going on, he sees a headline about some event in San Diego. Now, this is all just, you know, simple convenience. This is really just Mike Carlin saying, hey, let's just give the Fantastic Four a reason to leave. And let's give Spider-Man a reason to go with him. And so because of this, the Fantastic Four take off, and Spider-Man, Peter Parker's like, well, you know, I mean, maybe I can help them out. And he ends up going with them as well. And so what this does is this gives Aunt May the chance to turn to the Fantastic Four and say, hey, you know, I couldn't help but overhear your problem. I'll keep an eye on Franklin Richards while I'm here, or at least until you guys get back, and then you can, you know, take him back home or whatever it is that you guys are gonna do. Now, this is where the story goes from, this is kind of interesting, to what in the hell is going on? Like, because as I was reading through this, I was like, the more I read it, the more I was like, this is insane. But But the more I read it, the more I was also like, I really have to make a video about this. So we have Galactus arriving on Earth, and his immediate first step is to contact Reed Richards. And this makes sense, because for those of you guys who are familiar with the history of Galactus, or have read, the stories of his character, or saw my videos on his publication history, or Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, ever since Reed Richards basically fought Galactus off by threatening to destroy him with the Ultimate Nullifier, there's always been this sort of respect between the two. Galactus said he would never consume Earth, but he has a lot of respect for Reed Richards because of his intelligence, because of his efforts as a superhero, because of the fact that he's explored so much of the universe and he's charted so much stuff that's out there, and been as much of a chronicler as he has been a guy that acts in accordance with the stereotypical beliefs of a superhero. And so because of this, Galactus shows up and says, Reed, I need your help, because we would expect Galactus to turn to Reed Richards as one of the smartest people in the universe and say, hey, I need you to help me satiate my hunger for the time being. The issue with this is that when Galactus arrives, because Reed and the Fantastic Four are in San Diego, they're not there, but Galactus also senses the energy of Franklin Richards. Now, the indication here from Mike Carlin is, technically speaking, this is the first time that Galactus is encountering Franklin Richards in the history of Marvel Comics. Granted, this is a what-if story, but as far as I'm aware, this is the first time they ever actually meet. And so Galactus, follows this energy signature and ends up at the circus and tears the top off the place, rips the top off. Now, of course, you got people running for their lives, people are fleeing and they're panicking and so on, but Galactus immediately senses Franklin Richards because his idea is to make Franklin his herald just because of the raw reality warping power that he possesses. But when this happens, when he makes his presence known, Aunt May just starts giving him the business. Aunt May's pissed because he ruined her day. She shows up, she's like, dude, you can't show up here and start tearing people's stuff up. You can't rip the tops off circus buildings, and you can't, come in here and destroy my day, which is legitimate. I mean, with Aunt May, woe betide the poor soul that ruins her day, because they get read the riot act, and that's exactly what Galactus is getting. Now, in all seriousness, things begin to transition towards Aunt May becoming a Herald of Galactus when Galactus immediately attacks Franklin with the intention of making him his herald. But what Aunt May does is she basically jumps in the way to protect Franklin, and she's blasted with the full might of Galactus's power in making her a herald, and she emerges she emerges as the Golden Oldie. That is her name. She's calling herself the Golden Oldie. Now, what happens is Galactus tells Aunt May, look, I didn't expect you to be the one that would become a herald, but whatever. Sometimes we just got to deal with the hands that we're dealt. And he says, look, my hunger is killing me right now. I need you to go and find a source of sustenance. Now, Franklin Richards steps up in true child fashion and says, hey, I've got Twinkies, have some. And Galactus eats them, and Galactus is satisfied with them. Now, Rob Corps, members of the Rob Corps, let's take a second right now to acknowledge the fact that Galactus is eating Twinkies. Twinkies. And they're satiating his hunger. They're keeping his hunger at bay. Galactus is eating Twinkies right now, but what he does is he tells Aunt May, he says, look, these Twinkies are amazing. Which Twinkies are amazing? And he says, go find me some more. So of course, Aunt May begins to, or I guess Golden Oldie begins to scour the planet, grabbing all the Twinkies she can find. I mean, she just runs up on folks and just snatches the Twinkies out of their hand. And this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And ends up taking him to Galactus. But the problem with this is that Galactus's hunger is almost infinite. I mean, he's always needing to consume energies. And so the most logical situation happens when he says, hey, look, this is not enough. I need all the Twinkies you can give me. And so she literally, gives him all the Twinkies on the face of the earth. And because of this, because he's still hungry, he basically sends her into the cosmos for the purpose of finding more Twinkies for him, or at least finding, the traditional planets that he can consume. Now, during her journey, she ultimately comes across a giant Twinkie planet. Now, the idea here for her, this is insane. The idea, you guys better appreciate this video. Like, I want to be seeing some likes, all right? I want to be seeing some comments, in this, because I want to see some appreciation, because this is insane. Now, when she goes and, when she first encounters the planet, she's immediately attacked by what amounts to the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, or I guess not really Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, the Pillsbury Doughboy. There we go. She's attacked, or at least, met with the arrival of the Pillsbury Doughboy. Now, what we learn is that the Pillsbury Doughboy was believed by his people to simply be creating donuts. And so they banished him from their planet. What he says is he's not just creating donuts, he's creating planets that just also happen to be Twinkies. And so when Galactus arrives, he says, look, I'm going to consume this planet. I mean, that's just the way it is. I'm going to eat everything here. Now, the Pillsbury Doughboy begs and pleads and says, no, look, you can't do this, man. You can't consume the planet. But Galactus is like, yeah, man, this is going to happen. Now here's a cool thing about this story though. In all seriousness, here's a cool thing about this. This is just fun. I mean, this story is not meant to be taken seriously, you know, obviously. It's not meant to be something that leads to some grandiose thing. It's literally just having a good time. We don't see things like this very often because Marvel very rarely delves into something as ridiculous as this. I mean, in truth, Deadpool is about as goofy and silly as Marvel gets in this day and age. But back in the 1980s, it was literally just write whatever you want to. I mean, you had Jim Shooter, who was editor-in-chief, and as long as they made their deadlines, and as long as they followed editorial mandates for what it is that he had going on at that particular point in time, you know, they were just kind of free to do whatever they wanted to. Granted, Jim Shooter ran Marvel with an iron fist, and a lot of people hated him because of his editorial mandates, but when it was time to play, it was time to play. And a lot of the writers were very, very good at what they did. And so, you know, Galactus initially makes his way in with the intention of consuming this planet, but then we also have the Pillsbury Doughboy step up and say, hey, look, you know, I'll sacrifice myself. I'm literally a guy with an infinite source of doughy deliciousness, and you are welcome to consume me, and it'll satiate your hunger forevermore. And so Galactus does that. Galactus quite literally just consumes the Pillsbury Doughboy. And so at this point, you know, Aunt May, there's really no need for her anymore. And so she's essentially just kind of freed from her captivity, and she's allowed to return to Earth. And when she does, we of course have the return of the Fantastic Four, we have the return of Spider-Man, and then we suddenly realize that this was all a dream in the mind of Peter Parker. He just wakes up in the middle of the night and realizes that it was all a dream. It was all just supposed to be, you know, some kind of a joke. But no, I mean, you know, the story's fun for what it is. It's ridiculous, but it's fun for what it is. You know, it's just kind of good old-fashioned goofing around, Marvel style, you know, that kind of thing. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained and you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you guys like this, and you know, drop a like and leave a comment down below, because I don't usually do videos like this very often, but it is fun to do them every once in a while, just because I think doing something like this too consistently would drive even me nuts, you know. But it's very important with comic books to recognize that comics are just supposed to be a source of entertainment. I mean, you know, comic books are just supposed to be a source of fun. In the end, we really should just be enjoying them. And so, you know, while there will be people who will hate this, there will also be people who will love it. And that's the beauty of comics, is that, you know, people see things from different perspectives and everybody enjoys different things. But with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.